The evening rush at Golden Bay Restaurant was in full swing, with the clinking of wine glasses mixing with the gentle murmur of conversation. Among the bustling servers weaving between tables, one particular waitress moved with a kind of grace that seemed almost out of place in the hectic atmosphere. Her name tag read May, and she had a way of making every guest feel special, even on the busiest nights. Mai had been working double shifts for the past 3 years at this upscale restaurant in the heart of the city. The elegant establishment, with its crystal chandeliers and panoramic views of the bay, attracted wealthy business people and celebration dinners. She knew the regulars by name, remembered their favorite wines, and could anticipate their orders before they spoke. But there was something about May that none of her customers or even most of her coworkers knew. Every time she walked past the magnificent grand piano that sat near the bar, her fingers would twitch ever so slightly. The beautiful instrument, with its polished black surface reflecting the warm restaurant lighting, was like an old friend she couldn't greet properly anymore. 10 years ago, Mai had been on a very different path. Her childhood home had once been filled with the sound of classical music as she practiced for hours each day. Her mother had sacrificed everything to pay for her lessons, working extra hours at the local grocery store. Mai had been a piano prodigy, performing at prestigious venues across the country. Her teachers had said she had a rare gift, the kind that could open doors to the world's greatest concert halls. But life had other plans. When her mother got sick, the medical bills started piling up. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Mai put her dreams of music school on hold and started working full-time. At first, it was supposed to be temporary, just until things got better. But temporary turned into months, then years. Now, at 28, May carried plates instead of playing concertos. She had become an expert at balancing 5 plates at once, at remembering complicated orders without writing them down, at solving problems with a smile that never revealed the effort behind it. Her hands, once dedicated to Chopin and Beethoven, now carried trays and wrote out bills. The restaurant's piano saw a rotating cast of musicians who played soft dinner music each evening. May would sometimes catch herself swaying slightly as she worked, her body remembering the rhythms and melodies she once brought to life. Some nights, after her shift ended and the restaurant was empty except for the cleaning staff, she would stand near the piano, almost touching the keys before turning away. Her coworkers knew her as the reliable one, the server who never lost her cool even when dealing with the rudest customers. The one who would cover your shift if you had an emergency, who remembered everyone's birthdays, who could calm down an angry customer with just a few kind words. What they didn't know was how she mentally played every piece the restaurant's pianist performed, her fingers moving slightly at her sides as she served dishes or poured wine. Tonight was particularly busy, with every table filled and a waiting list that stretched into the next hour. Mai moved efficiently between tables, her comfortable black shoes barely making a sound on the polished floor. As she cleared a table near the piano, the current pianist, Mr. Lee, was playing a piece she knew by heart. Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 11. She caught herself humming along softly, remembering how the keys felt under her fingers during her last recital, a lifetime ago. A small smile crossed her face as she carried a stack of plates back to the kitchen. Maybe some dreams didn't die. They just waited quietly, like a piano in an empty room, for the right moment to make music again. The day had started like any other at Golden Bay Restaurant. Mai had arrived early for her shift, helping the morning crew set up the dining room while the kitchen staff prepared for lunch service. The familiar scent of freshly baked bread and brewing coffee filled the air. Everything seemed normal until Mr. Lee, the restaurant's regular pianist, called in sick. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. The lunch crowd rarely paid much attention to the piano anyway, too busy with their business meetings and quick meals. But as the afternoon wore on and evening approached, the restaurant's owner, Mr. Wu, began pacing nervously near the host stand. His usually calm demeanor showed signs of stress as he checked his phone repeatedly. No one's available on such short notice, he muttered to himself, running a hand through his graying hair. Not a single pianist in the city can make it tonight. May overheard snippets of his increasingly worried phone conversations as she served her tables. The restaurant had built its reputation not just on excellent food, but on its elegant atmosphere. The piano music was as much a part of the dining experience as the crystal glasses and fine china. Tonight was especially important. The restaurant was fully booked, with 3 different wedding anniversaries, a retirement celebration, and several business dinners. The guests had specifically requested tables near the piano, expecting the usual evening entertainment. The empty piano bench seemed to mock them all. Its silence grew more noticeable as the dinner hour approached. Some regular customers were already asking about the music, their disappointment visible despite their polite smiles. "Maybe we could play some recorded music," suggested one of the younger servers, trying to help. Mr. Wu shook his head. "It's not the same. Our guests expect live music. It's part of what makes Golden Bay special." Mai watched the situation unfold while carrying plates of steaming food to her tables. Her heart beat a little faster every time she passed the piano. Its keys seemed to call to her, bringing back memories of countless hours spent practicing, performing, living, and breathing music. The dinner rush began, and the restaurant quickly filled with well-dressed guests. The sound of conversation and clinking cutlery grew louder, but something was missing. Without the piano's gentle notes floating through the air, the atmosphere felt incomplete, like a painting missing its final touches. Mr. Wu's anxiety peaked when he recognized a particular guest entering the restaurant. It was Mr. Chen, the city's most influential food critic, known for his detailed reviews that could make or break a restaurant's reputation. He was accompanied by his family, celebrating his daughter's graduation. "Table 15, by the piano," Mr. Wu whispered urgently to the host. "Give them our best server." May was assigned to their table, and as she approached with water and menus, she couldn't help but notice Mr. Chen glancing at the empty piano. The critic's eyebrow raised slightly, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes about his expectations. As she moved between tables, Mai felt the weight of the situation growing heavier. She watched Mr. Wu trying to maintain his composure while dealing with increasingly frequent questions about the evening's entertainment. The other servers were doing their best to compensate with extra attentive service, but the absence of music left a noticeable void. Her fingers trembled slightly as she poured wine at another table, remembering how they used to dance across piano keys with confidence and skill. The piece Mr. Li usually played at this hour, a gentle Chopin nocturne, played in her head as clearly as if she were performing it herself. Mai caught her reflection in one of the restaurant's large windows. She saw herself not just as a waitress in a black uniform, but as someone who might have the power to change the evening's course. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. After all these years of keeping her musical past hidden, of building a different life, was she really considering stepping into the spotlight again? The piano sat there, waiting, its silence growing louder with each passing minute. And somewhere deep inside, a voice she hadn't listened to in years whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment she'd been waiting for without even knowing it. Time seemed to move differently as Mai watched the elegant dining room slowly lose its magic. The food was still perfect, the service impeccable, but without the gentle piano music floating through the air, something vital was missing. She could feel it in the way guests leaned in closer to hear each other over the growing din of conversation, in the slightly disappointed glances toward the empty piano bench. At table 15, the food critic Mr. Chen was carefully cutting into his perfectly cooked steak, his expression unreadable. His family chatted quietly, but May noticed how his eyes kept drifting to the silent piano. Each time she approached their table, she felt the weight of unmet expectations in the air. The kitchen door swung open, and out came Mr. Wu, looking more distressed than Mai had ever seen him in her 3 years at Golden Bay. He was clutching his phone like a lifeline, but it was clear no musical rescue was coming. She watched him adjust his tie for the 100th time that evening, a nervous habit she'd come to recognize. May's hands shook slightly as she poured water for an elderly couple celebrating their 45th anniversary. They were regulars who usually requested a table near the piano, loving how the musician would play their favorite love songs. Tonight, they sat in uncomfortable silence, the romance of their special evening dimmed. 6 years, May whispered to herself as she headed back to the kitchen. 6 years since she'd last performed in public. 6 years of keeping her music locked away in her heart, only letting it out in quiet moments at home when no one could hear. Her fingers unconsciously moved at her sides, playing invisible keys to a melody only she could hear. A crash from the kitchen made her jump. Through the swinging doors, she could hear the sous chef apologizing. Just a dropped pan, nothing serious. But the sudden noise had broken through her thoughts, forcing her to confront the decision she'd been avoiding all evening. Could she really do this? Her throat felt dry at the mere thought of sitting at that piano. What if she'd forgotten everything? What if her fingers, now more used to carrying plates than playing Mozart, wouldn't remember? What if she made a fool of herself in front of everyone, especially Mr. Chen? But then she remembered her mother's words from years ago. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about sharing what's in your heart. Her mother had sacrificed so much for her lessons, working extra shifts, never complaining. Even when they had to sell the piano to pay for hospital bills, her mother had said, "The music is inside you, not in the instrument." Mai glanced at her watch. It was nearly 8 o'clock, the time when the restaurant usually came alive with its most beloved classical pieces. Mr. Li would typically be playing something romantic now, perhaps some Schubert or Brahms. Instead, the elegant dining room felt like a beautiful painting missing its colors. Taking a deep breath, Mai straightened her uniform and walked toward Mr. Wu, who was now standing near the host station, attempting to smooth over another guest's complaint about the lack of music. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Mr. Wu," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned, surprise flickering across his face at her unusually hesitant tone. I think I might be able to help." He looked at her questioningly, stress lines deep around his eyes. May had always been his most reliable server, but what could she possibly do about this situation? "I used to," she started, then paused, gathering her courage. "I used to play. The piano, I mean, professionally." Mr. Wu's eyes widened, but before he could respond, a loud burst of laughter from a nearby table made them both jump. The noise in the restaurant had grown uncomfortably loud without the piano's gentle background notes to soften it. "You play?" he asked, hope and skepticism mixing in his voice. "Why didn't you ever mention this?" Mai looked down at her hands, these hands that had once brought audiences to their feet, now more familiar with carrying plates and writing orders. "It was a long time ago," she said. "But if you'd like, if you think it would help, I could try." The moment hung between them like a held breath. Through the windows, the city lights twinkled against the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Everything seemed to be waiting for an answer, for someone to break the silence that had taken over Golden Bay's elegant dining room. Mr. Wu looked at May for a long moment, hope battling with uncertainty in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "Take your break now," he said softly. "If you're sure about this." The walk to the piano felt like the longest journey of May's life. Every step echoed in her mind as conversations buzzed around her. A few regular customers noticed her approaching the piano, their curious glances following her movement. Her work shoes felt suddenly heavy against the polished floor. The piano bench was cool and smooth beneath her as she sat down. She adjusted its height with practiced movements her body remembered, even if her mind was clouded with doubt. The keys gleamed under the warm restaurant lighting, pristine white and glossy black, waiting. Mai placed her hands on the keys, and memories flooded back. Countless hours of practice, recitals in grand halls, her mother's proud smile. Her fingers trembled slightly as they found their familiar positions. The dining room's chatter seemed to fade away as she took a deep breath. The first notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune floated into the air, hesitant at first, like raindrops before a storm. May had chosen this piece carefully. It was gentle enough to not startle the diners, yet complex enough to show that this was no amateur performance. As her fingers remembered their way across the keys, her confidence grew. The melody swelled, filling the restaurant with its dreamy atmosphere. A wine glass paused halfway to someone's lips. A fork clattered softly against a plate as its owner forgot about their meal. The conversations began to dim, replaced by the sound of piano music that seemed to paint the evening air with silver moonlight. May closed her eyes, letting muscle memory guide her hands. The music flowed through her like a river finding its path after a long drought. Each note felt like coming home, like speaking a language she had almost forgotten she knew. The tension in her shoulders melted away as she lost herself in the familiar embrace of the music. A waiter nearly dropped his tray, startled by the unexpected skill of his colleague. In the kitchen, the chef paused in his cooking to listen. Mr. Wu stood by the host station, his face transformed with relief and wonder. But May noticed none of this, completely absorbed in her performance. As Clair de Lune drew to its gentle close, May seamlessly transitioned into a soft jazz standard she knew the regular customers loved to hear. She opened her eyes briefly and caught a glimpse of Mr. Chen, the food critic, watching intently, his fork forgotten in his hand. His expression had softened, and he was gently swaying to the music. The restaurant had transformed. The earlier tension had disappeared, replaced by an atmosphere of enchantment. Couples leaned closer together, sharing secret smiles. An elderly man wiped a tear from his corner of his eye, perhaps remembering a distant memory. Even the buzzboys moved more gracefully, as if dancing to the melody. May's fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence, years of training returning like old friends. She moved from one piece to another, blending classical with contemporary, creating a musical journey that seemed to touch every guest in the room. Her earlier fears felt distant now, washed away by the joy of playing again. A young child at a nearby table pressed her face against the glass partition, watching May's hands with wide-eyed wonder. Parents who had been struggling to keep their children quiet now found them sitting still, mesmerized by the music. The whole restaurant seemed to breathe together, united by the unexpected gift of song. Time lost its meaning as Mai played. She didn't notice her break time had long passed, or that other servers had quietly covered her tables. All that existed was the music, the keys beneath her fingers, and the pure joy of sharing this part of herself she had kept hidden for so long. The clicking of phone cameras began discreetly at first, then more openly as diners captured this magical moment. Social media would soon buzz with videos of the waitress pianist. But May remained lost in her performance, each note a step further along the path back to herself. As she finished another piece, the sound of spontaneous applause startled her back to reality. She looked up to find the entire restaurant watching her. Smiling faces turned toward the piano that had sat silent just an hour before. In that moment, May realized that sometimes the best moments in life come when we finally have the courage to be who we truly are. The applause continued to ripple through Golden Bay Restaurant as Mai finished another piece. Her cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and joy as she gave a slight bow from the piano bench. As she stood to return to her serving duties, she noticed Mr. Chen, the food critic, making his way toward the piano. There was something different about his walk, a sense of purpose that made her pause. The other diners watched curiously as he approached, his reputation well known enough to create a buzz of whispered conversations. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime in the world of classical music. "That was Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor," he said, his voice warm with appreciation. "But you gave it your own touch, lighter, more contemplative. Very interesting interpretation." May's heart skipped a beat. Not many people could identify classical pieces so precisely, let alone comment on specific interpretations. She nodded, surprised he had noticed the subtle changes she'd made to the piece. I studied at a conservatory for many years, Mr. Chen continued, noticing her reaction. But I haven't heard someone play with such natural feeling in a long time. Tell me, where did you train? The other diners had grown quiet, straining to hear their conversation. May smoothed her apron nervously, very aware of her waitress uniform in this moment. I studied at the City Music Academy, she replied softly. A long time ago. Mr. Chen's eyebrows rose with recognition. Under Professor Lin. When May nodded, he smiled broadly. He only accepts exceptional students. I'm on the board of the City Symphony Orchestra, you know. We're always looking for fresh talent. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Mai could feel Mr. Wu watching from near the host station, could sense her fellow servers pausing in their tasks to listen. The weight of possibility hung heavy in the air. But I haven't performed professionally in 6 years, May said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not sure if I could. An elderly couple at a nearby table joined the conversation. We've been coming here every anniversary for 10 years, the woman said, her eyes twinkling. But we've never heard anything as beautiful as you're playing tonight. More diners began sharing their thoughts, their voices overlapping with enthusiasm. A young businessman mentioned how her music had made him miss his grandmother's piano lessons. A mother spoke about how her fidgety children had sat perfectly still, enchanted by the performance. Someone had posted a video of her playing online, and it was already gathering attention. Mai watched in amazement as Mr. Wu's phone kept buzzing with notifications. People were sharing the clip, asking if a talented pianist would be performing again. Music isn't something you lose, Mr. Chen said gently, noting her hesitation. It just waits, like an old friend, for you to return. You have a gift that shouldn't be hidden behind a serving tray. The restaurant's atmosphere had changed completely. Guests who had been strangers just hours ago were now engaged in animated discussions about music, sharing stories of their own musical memories. May's performance had transformed the elegant dining room into a warm community space. A young girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing at May with wide eyes. Can I learn to play like that? She asked loudly, making several people smile. The mother looked at May apologetically, but Mai felt her heart warm at the child's innocent admiration. Mr. Wu had made his way to the piano, his earlier stress replaced with an expression of wonder. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, not unkindly. All these years. Mai looked around at the faces turned toward her, encouraging, supportive, curious. The weight of her secret felt lighter somehow, replaced by something that felt like possibility. Her fingers still tingled from playing, as if awakened from a long sleep. Sometimes, she said slowly, finding the right words, we keep parts of ourselves hidden because we're afraid. Afraid of failing, afraid of hoping too much, afraid of changing what's comfortable. She touched the piano keys lightly, feeling their smooth coolness under her fingertips. But tonight reminded me that music isn't just about playing notes correctly. It's about sharing something real with others. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of emotions and conversations. As the last customers began to leave Golden Bay Restaurant, May found herself sitting at a corner table with Mr. Chen and Mr. Wu. The dining room was quiet now, with only the soft clink of dishes being cleared in the background. The symphony orchestra has a special program for emerging artists, Mr. Chen explained, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. We provide mentorship, practice space, and performance opportunities. It could be a perfect way for you to return to music professionally. May's hands wrapped around a cup of warm tea, her mind swirling with possibilities and doubts. The evening's performance had awakened something in her that she thought was long buried, but reality was creeping back in with all its complications. I have responsibilities, she said softly, thinking of her mother's medical bills, the rent, the stable income her current job provided. I can't just. Mr. Wu cleared his throat, interrupting her thoughts. What if we could work something out? He suggested, leaning forward. The restaurant needs a regular pianist anyway. You could perform here 3 nights a week, practice during off hours, and keep some serving shifts if you want. A busboy passed by, giving Mai an encouraging smile. Word had spread quickly among the staff about their colleagues' hidden talent, and the support was overwhelming. The kitchen staff had even prepared a special late-night meal for her, saying she needed energy after such an amazing performance. But what if I'm not good enough anymore? Mai voiced her deepest fear. 6 years is a long time. The symphony orchestra, that's a whole different level. Mr. Chen pulled out his phone, showing her the video of her performance that had already gathered thousands of views online. Comments poured in from people amazed by the waitress pianist, many asking where they could hear more. Raw talent like yours doesn't disappear, he said firmly. It just needs the right opportunity to shine again. Listen, there's a small recital next week at the community center. Why don't you come and play just one piece? No pressure, just a chance to dip your toes back into the musical world. The night air drifted in through an open window, carrying the distant sounds of the city. May remembered how she used to practice late into the night, dreaming of performing in grand concert halls. Those dreams had seemed so far away these past few years, like stars too distant to reach. A memory surfaced, her mother sitting beside her at their old piano, saying life sometimes takes unexpected turns, but that doesn't mean we lose who we are. Her mother had always believed in her, even when they had to sell the piano. One of the younger servers approached their table, apologetically interrupting. Sorry, but some customers want to know if you'll be playing tomorrow night, she said to May. They said they'd bring their whole family to listen. Mr. Wu smiled. See, you already have a following. He pulled out a piece of paper and began sketching out a possible schedule. We could start with weekend performances, see how it goes. The restaurant can handle the bookings, promote your shows. Mai watched him plan, feeling a strange mix of terror and excitement. The practical part of her mind listed all the reasons to say no, the risks, the uncertainties, the comfortable routine she'd be disrupting. But her heart remembered how alive she felt at the piano tonight, how the music had flowed through her like a river breaking through a dam. There's a practice room at the community center, Mr. Chen added gently. You could use it any time. And I know several excellent teachers who would be honored to help you prepare for auditions. Outside, the city lights twinkled like possibilities. The empty restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her answer. Mai looked at her hands, servers' hands that still remembered how to make music, still knew how to bring beauty into the world. Maybe, she said slowly, a smile beginning to form, it's time to stop hiding. But I need to find a way to balance everything. My mother. One step at a time, Mr. Chen assured her. The music world isn't going anywhere. We can start small, build slowly. The important thing is to begin. 3 months had passed since that life-changing night at Golden Bay Restaurant. The dining room buzzed with its usual evening energy, but something was different now. Elegant golden letters on the entrance door announced, Special piano performance every Friday and Saturday night. The restaurant had transformed in subtle ways. Regular customers planned their visits around May's performances. The once quiet weekday evenings now filled with music lovers who came early to secure tables near the piano. Mr. Wu had even installed soft lighting above the instrument, creating a warm spotlight for the performances. Tonight was special. May's first official concert at the city's community center would begin in just 2 hours. She moved between tables with practiced ease, serving early dinners to customers who had become more like friends over the past months. We'll be there tonight, an elderly couple told her as she refilled their water glasses. They had been coming to hear her play every Friday since her first performance. We wouldn't miss it for the world. In the kitchen, The staff had prepared a surprise. The head chef, known for his stern demeanor, had baked a small cake decorated with musical notes. "For energy," he said gruffly, but his eyes sparkled with pride. "You'll need it for your big night." May's schedule had found a comfortable rhythm these past months. Mornings were for practice at the community center, where Mr. Chen had arranged for her to use their grand piano. Afternoons split between serving at the restaurant and giving piano lessons to a small group of students, including that wide-eyed little girl who had watched her play on that first night. Evenings alternated between performances at Golden Bay and rehearsals with her new mentor from the symphony orchestra. Her mother had cried when May first brought her to hear her play at the restaurant. "I always knew the music was still in you," she had said, squeezing May's hand. The medical bills were still there, but they felt less overwhelming now. Between her regular serving shifts, weekend performances, and growing number of students, May had found a way to make it work. The video of her first performance had taken on a life of its own. Local news stations had picked up the story, the waitress pianist who brought classical music to everyday people. But what touched May most were the messages from others who had put their dreams on hold, saying her story gave them courage to try again. As evening approached, May hung up her apron one last time. Mr. Wu had insisted she take the next few days off to focus on her concert preparation. Her fellow servers hugged her, whispering good luck wishes and promises to attend the performance. In the employee bathroom, May changed into the simple black dress she had chosen for the concert. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned back her hair, not from fear this time, but from excitement. The community center's concert hall wasn't huge, but it would be her first real performance in 6 years. The practice room at the community center had become like a second home. Hours spent relearning complex pieces, working through difficult passages, and discovering that her fingers remembered more than she thought possible. Her new mentor had been right. It was like riding a bicycle, wobbly at first, but growing steadier with each attempt. Before leaving the restaurant, May sat at the piano one last time. Her fingers found the keys of Debussy's Clair de Lune, the piece that had started it all. The familiar notes filled the empty restaurant as the staff prepared for dinner service. A new waiter paused in his set of duties to listen. "Someone told me you used to be just a server here," he said. "Is that true?" May smiled, thinking about how life's melodies sometimes hide in unexpected places. "I was never just a server," she replied, her fingers still moving across the keys. "Sometimes we're more than what we appear to be. We just need the right moment to let it show." As she gathered her music sheets and prepared to leave for the concert hall, May caught her reflection in the restaurant's window. She saw neither a waitress nor a concert pianist, but something wonderfully in between, someone who had found her own unique way to make music in the world.